Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and that sometimes messy thing we call life. This podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com. All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, welcome back to yet another episode. And I am privileged, actually, to have, I've known Jason Groupp for such a long time. Jason, thanks for hanging out with me today on the Bokeh Podcast.
Yeah, dude, I was thinking about it today, and I was saying to my wife this morning when we got up, I'm like, I'm going on Nathan Holritz's podcast. And she's like, oh my God, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
If I remember right, I stayed at your place.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, what was it, 10 years ago, 12 years ago?
It was at least 10 years ago. It was like when we first bought our house in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So, and that's what she remembered. She was like, wait, was that the guy we locked in the basement by accident? I was
Pretty
like, no,
much.
that was Frank.
I did stay in the basement though, I think. That's funny. I hadn't even thought about that in a little while. And I was actually looking at our Facebook Messenger history, and we had some messages going back to 2009. And then I know I knew you before then too. So yeah, a lot of history. And I mean, that's largely what our conversation is going to revolve around today, is not only your history in the industry, but then ultimately what you've learned from that. And I think, I mean, in life, I think perspective is such a big component to living a good life, developing a perspective, and we can learn from others' perspectives. And the perspective you've developed through all the various experiences that you've had in 20 plus years in the industry, I think is going to be a fascinating one to dig into. So we're going to do that in just a little bit. By the way, I have to say too, speaking of Facebook Messenger, I love that you just gave me a shout out and you were like, dude, why haven't you had me on the podcast yet? And so we're making it happen. We actually made it happen really quickly, and I'm stoked to do this. But something that I haven't seen in a little while is you having your shingle up as a photographer. You're in the St. Louis market now.
Yep.
And something we talk a lot about here on the podcast is brand position, because I don't think it's discussed enough in the industry. For those of you listening in who aren't really familiar with the concept, it very simply is the unique value proposition, with emphasis on unique, that you bring to your market. And looking at it in a different way, this is the position that your brand holds in the mind of somebody who hears your name. So when the name of your business pops up, this is the idea that pops in their head. They'll be like, oh, that's the photographer that does, fill in the blank. So with that context, Jason, in the St. Louis market, what is your business's brand position?
So in a few seconds, it's the city of St. Louis portrait photographer with expertise in finding the best iconic locations for your family. Wow.
Okay. And there's actually a photo that reflects this idea too. If everybody listening in, if you go just very simply to Jason Groupp, GROUPP.com, the homepage, beautiful image actually with the arch, and what I'm assuming is a family there underneath the arch. That's a really cool shot.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I've taken the idea of what I used to do with my I Heart New York sessions in New York City, which was kind of creating these iconic locations in New York. And, St. Louis is a great city, and, there's so many iconic places here. And if you lived here a little while, I mean, St. Louis is, from my perspective, is not a super well-known city, but there are so many great places here. And when I made the decision to just do family pictures, I wanted to take that same approach.
Well, and the other thing that I'm noticing on the homepage of your site that really stood out to me when we talk about this idea of a brand position, a lot of times I emphasize the importance of brevity, simplicity, being concise in the communication of that brand position. Because you ask photographers what their brand represents, and sometimes it's like paragraphs of information. And we all know in a noisy 2019 world, people get lost and distracted if you go on for more than 3 seconds. So you've got a little tagline there on the homepage of your site, which is very simply "Family Photos Made Easy." Talk to me a little bit about what that means.
I made the decision when I was going to start shooting again. The first thing was my wife begged me that I would not become a wedding photographer again. She didn't want to be a wedding widow again.
Okay.
And I'm torn about that because I do miss shooting weddings. But
yeah.
I decided to do families because, I'm kind of in that world now. I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, and, everything's centered around doing stuff with the kids, and, family pictures are a really important thing to us. And I honestly, I just felt like there was every photographer here in St. Louis does family pictures, but nobody was specializing in just doing family pictures as far as I could tell. And nobody was really kind of owning, iconic locations, even though they were all doing it in different places. So, that was kind of my thought process that, I wanted to do something, and I know how much of a pain in the neck getting your family picture is. So right. I wanted to create something that might resonate with other parents, yep. which is, make it easy. So that was kind of my thing, is that's all we do is family pictures, and we're going to make it super easy for you.
And so you spoke to two things there, which are interesting to me. One, you talked about the idea of owning the space. And this is really important, actually, as a concept when it comes to brand position and ultimately a marketing effort. If you, the listener, as a photographer, are saying essentially the same thing that 20 other photographers are saying, whether that's on your website or in a Facebook ad or in conversation with somebody at a networking meeting, it's all just going to run together, and then you just become another photographer. It's important that you find a space or a niche in that market that you can own, as Jason's saying. And what that means is, even if you're not the only one doing it, you're the first one to come out, or the primary individual coming out and saying, this is what I do. And everything that you do revolves around that. So when Jason says owning the space, I think that's really important to keep in mind the significance of that concept. The other thing is, we're talking about family photos made easy. It'd be one thing, Jason, you don't strike me as somebody who would do this anyway, but a trend has kind of spread across the industry, if you will, in the last few years, for photographers to just spend a lot of time talking about themselves when you get to a photographer's website. And the first thing that you do instead of talking about yourself is talk about how you add value to the potential client's life. They want family photos, but not only that, how stressful those family photos can be. So you say, you know what? Not only are we going to give you great family photos and an iconic location, but we're going to make it really, really easy for you. And immediately, I think that is a massive value add to the potential client. And I love that you highlight that.
Yeah, and I plan on spending a lot of time this year, kind of advertising that value proposition. And, and I know we'll get to it, but, I've had the advantage of being around so many different photographers and so many talented people, and, being able to draw off of their experiences and expertise has definitely helped me. And when I went to relaunch this business, some of my good friends said, don't worry, launching your photography business a second time is not as hard as the first time.
Yeah.
So, I definitely feel like I've been able to, draw from that a little bit. But, I'm a big specialist guy, and I always have been in all aspects of my career. And, I believe that, if you can make plenty of money doing one thing and being really good at it, it's just a matter of finding those things. And we all want to be a lot of different things, but really, finding, those things. Like, I hate shooting in the studio. I don't ever want to shoot in the studio.
Yeah.
So this is a big part of that, and so identifying those different things. So it's a lot easier for me this time. I love St. Louis. I love exploring new locations. I'm a family guy, and, because I'm around kids a lot now, I'm work with them a lot better than I did before I had kids. And, I know what to say to a 10-year-old, because I have one, So, I'm using those unique things that I have, and I'm a little bit older. So I find that, I'm an older dad versus, a super young parent. So I find that they listen to me a little bit more too. So I try and use those things to my advantage.
Well, and you spoke about being a family guy. So this is a great segue to my next question, which has to do with time. So much of what we talk about here on the podcast centers around this idea because, at least for me personally, I didn't start a business to work 80 hours a week. I wanted to have some freedom, some flexibility. I want to actually leverage that as an idea in my life and do more than just work. You've got kids, and I mean, the idea of work ultimately keeping you from being able to be a good dad and to be a good husband. I know that's something that you're cognizant of or not wanting to allow to happen. So is there something that you do proactively that enables you to have the space both for work, but then also for family and the other important people in your life?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. One, no eating until the work I've laid out for myself is done. So that's my incentive.
Really? Okay.
So no lunch in the morning. So I'm more of a morning person than an evening person.
Okay.
So I get most of my work done between when the kids leave for school and lunchtime. Like that's my jam.
Okay.
So it's those 4 hours between 8 and noon that I'm really focused on drinking coffee and working. And it's when I'm most productive. So again, I've recognized that that's the time I get stuff done. And that's my main, thing. And I just try and get as much done in those 4 hours as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And then I'll have a couple of hours after lunch. And then I just, once the kids get home and, because I'm, my wife has a full-time job as well, and she works full-time. She works at home. So we're both home during the day. We're both stay-at-home people.
Wow.
And, we're fortunate that we, have enough space in our new home that we don't even see each other during the day, and we can get stuff done. And it's great.
Yeah.
But with the kids, now that her job is she, is on the phone a lot during the day, I'm kind of the go-to person when a kid gets sick or forgot something at school, or
okay,
the guy who's dropping their. My kids are doing tons of sports now, so I'm the taxi to all of that. So I have to get my work done between 8 and 3 o'clock. My incentive is to get it done then, but whatever gets done at 3 o'clock, I just shut it off. I don't, I want to be there to be part of their lives, whether it's Eli's football or Phoebe's winter guard or whatever it is. I've just learned that if it's important between 3 and 7 o'clock, it's not that important. It can be answered at 8 o'clock at night after the kids go to bed or at that point, or more importantly, just 8 o'clock the next morning. So I just shut it off and I just recognize the fact that they're only going to be 10 for so long. They're only going to be 12 for so long.
Yeah.
And I'm really fortunate that I enjoy it. It's one of the reasons that I moved out here in the first place was because commuting in New York City and having a 12-hour workday was literally killing me. So now because I have that perspective, I love every minute of it. And I love just being the dad who's talking with, all the parents on the sidelines and being involved and, being the snack guy. I love it.
When you talk about being the parent on the sideline, I mean, when I think of you, especially in the context of photography, you're such a great conversationalist. Like you're the guy who you'd want to kind of scoot up next to on the sideline and, maybe bring a beer along or something and just have a conversation. You're really, really great at that. Is that conversational ability? I mean, I know it's benefited you significantly over your career. And again, we'll talk about that in just a bit, but is that something that you were good at from the get-go? Is that something you've developed over time?
I've always been that friendly guy that loves to talk to everybody. I mean, when we moved out here, we knew nobody and we've made so many friends. And, like last night, the kids had a holiday show. Yeah. And we sat down, we got there early so we could get good seats because my son had a pretty good part in the play. And Liz was laughing at me because she's like, gosh, you know everybody. And we've only been here, this was only the second or third play. And I've gotten involved with there's a dad's group that meets once a month and we have beers at a bar and we do some volunteer stuff. But, we've immersed ourselves in the community. Community is such a big thing for me. Just in general. So it doesn't matter whether it's photography community or my kids community. And, we're full immersion kind of people, but no, cool. I love it. It doesn't matter I love talking to people. It doesn't matter if it's the football dads who are very, Missouri football is definitely a different breed. Yeah. Hardcore. We pull into the parking lot and I got my little Mini and the entire parking lot is filled with, pickup truck. So, I still stick out like a sore thumb, but at the end of the day, I love talking with the dads and the moms. And it's, I get a lot out. I am an extrovert. I'm not an introvert. So I get a lot out of, being around people.
Are you showing up to the football games with your bow tie? I mean, you were kind of famous for wearing the bow tie to the WPPI events. Does that fly there in that area?
Not so much in the football world. It's funny, some of the dads who I friend on Facebook, they'll wind up like stalking me later, and they'll be like, "You are not the guy that I see on, dropping your son over football."
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Literally, I've had yourself, and then actually yesterday I interviewed Benjamin Davis, who's a cinematographer out of New Jersey, actually, and he also loves bow ties. Like when I see him at a conference, he's wearing bow ties. So 2 days in a row, bow tie fans. I think that's great. But
nice.
You were talking about something earlier, which is really grabbed my attention, and that is that you said you tend to try to get the majority of your work done in the first 4 hours of the day. And I've had a theory for some time now, having been a wedding photographer myself, and then being able to kind of step back from that and kind of see from the outside as well, that at least for wedding photographers, potentially portrait photographers as well, that you could run a business if you're intelligent about it, if you're proactive about it, if you actually have a strategy in place, you could run a business on 20, 25 hours of work a week. Do you think that is realistic?
Absolutely. I mean, it totally is. And it shouldn't take any more than that. Honestly, everything that's important can get done. And it's really about preparation for those 4 hours.
Yeah,
it really is. And so like the one thing that I'll do every night when Liz and I settle down for the night is, I'll prepare my work list for the next day. And it's just a quick checklist, what exactly am I doing? And sometimes I'll, work on that stuff when I know I'm not going to get it done in those 4 hours, and and it's just a running list of, make sure you get this stuff done.
That's cool. And you talking about planning. This is something as organized and as structured and as nerdy as I can be when it comes to task and project management and workflow and so forth. One of the things that it's a weakness of mine is planning. This holds true in my personal life. It holds true in business. And I'm realizing more and more the significance of it, and especially for the sake of efficiency. And so I love that you point that out, the significance of, even if you're planning for something as short as a 4-hour time frame, if you know ahead of time what you're going to work on, it helps kind of filter out the rest of the BS and the distractions. You can focus on what actually matters for the sake of moving your business forward, and then call it a day. I think that's brilliant.
Well, I mean, you can spend the first half hour deciding what you want to do if you don't do it before you sit down.
Yeah, 100%. Do you usually do that planning at the end of the previous day? When do you normally do that?
So the tasks that I usually need to get done are it's usually the same mundane things, but generally I find it's the stuff that I forget to do pops in my head when I'm taking my kids to practice. Like, oh God, I got to do that. Yeah. And I got to do that. So it's preparing myself to be like, as soon as I get Eli's, because I like to say during football season, I'm his equipment manager. Nice. So as soon as I get his pads on, I, pull out my phone and, write it down at that moment. So it's really about as parents, you're so scattered all the time. Yeah. So it's really just making sure that you write the stuff down immediately so that I can just to that list when I sit down in the evening.
Yeah, you talk about being scattered as a parent. So my kids, I'm a single dad, and my my kids, speaking of scatterbrain, my kids are with me for 95% of the time. And yesterday I was supposed to pick up my daughter, and school is out for the kids already for the Christmas break. And she was staying at a friend's house. And my son happened to remind me that I needed to go pick up my daughter because I'd already forgotten. And then on top of that, instead of going to my daughter's friend's house, I showed up at her school, and I'm like, where are you? And of course, she was at her friend's house. So, man, I got to get my stuff together. But I feel your pain there. It's interesting though. You talk about writing, so something pops into our heads, and this is something I'm sure that a lot of entrepreneurs and photographers can relate to. You're doing some random task, and it's interesting how our brain works, but an idea pops into our head, or something that we need to get done pops into our head. You mentioned writing it down. Do you just use a notes app, or do you have a task and project management system that you utilize? What does that look like?
It's usually either, I can't remember the name of the app. It's a list app. I think it's Tada.
Okay.
Sometimes I use that, or sometimes I just use Google Docs. Actually, just lately I've just been I'll just create a list, on Google Docs, because I'm always accessing that app on my phone, and everything syncs. So like Google Docs and Sheets and all that Google stuff is just so great. Okay. They're all amazing.
Well, I think at the end of the day, what matters is it's not about being fancy, and I'm kind of reading between the lines there, but that seems to be what you're alluding to, Jason. It's just having a place to put it. It does sync. You have access to it anywhere. And I think this is a good principle for all of our listeners to remember, is that just have a place when that thing comes to mind that you put it, you write it down, you jot it down. I use a task and project manager called Todoist, and it's got something that kind of based around the idea that a guy named David Allen came up with called getting things done, but it's got an inbox. And anything that comes to mind, you just dump into the inbox, and then you can organize it into the lists and give it due dates and all that kind of thing later on. But having a place to unload that so you don't have to try to keep track of it, likely you'll forget it anyway. I think that's really important. And so I'm glad that you bring that principle up. That's cool. So talk to me about, and man, I'm sure this could be a wide-ranging conversation in and of itself, but an impactful business or self-help book that's made a really big impact on your life in the last few years.
Anything by Seth Godin, I love, and anything. He, puts content out daily. He has been by far the person who has lasted the test of time for me, because there's so many of them. I loved Gary Vee for a long time, but I kind of feel like he's just regurgitating the same stuff over and over again. And I feel like he's yelling at me now versus being supportive. And that's coming from the New Yorker perspective. So I can't imagine how the rest of the world feels about that.
Yeah.
But Seth Godin for sure.
There's so much and I've enjoyed Seth over the years as well. There's so much that I could learn from him from a marketing standpoint. Right now, the thing that I'm particularly cognizant of is my tendency, whether as a host or maybe in some cases in writing copy, of just being too wordy. As much as I enjoy the idea of simplicity or minimalism, I tend to ramble on a little bit too much sometimes. He has this way of being able to communicate so concisely, to be able to give so much value with so few words. And I think that's just so unusual these days.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. I have the podcast. So I listen to the Fizzle Show a lot, which I really like.
Okay.
And Donald Miller's Story Brand is really good.
Yes. Yeah. And
so good.
I can't recommend that book enough. For anybody who's not read that, if you're listening in, we'll link to it in the show notes, along with all these other resources that Jason's mentioning, Seth's blog, etc. But yeah, that book is just killer. It's business books, and you probably know this, Jason. I mean, they tend to just also be extremely wordy. It's 75, 80% fluff, and then a little bit of good. And his book was just so rich with so much practical, actionable information. And in fact, we're actually in the process right now of repositioning Photographer's Edit for the 2020 year, and using the principles that he describes in that book in that process. It's just really, really great stuff. So we'll link to that in the show notes for everybody. Talk to me about the camera, the photography side of things. And I'm actually really curious about this for you. Something unusual in your camera bag, not necessarily a camera or lens, that enables you to be a better photographer.
I love my shoot sack.
Really? Okay.
I think I might be the last man standing.
But first of all, of course, this is very, in Japanese, they would say natsukashi, or nostalgic. This is a throwback because when Jason and I were actively shooting, Shootsack was a brand that popped up. Our friend Jessica Claire put together this brand and started selling these bags, and they just took off. They were doing really, really well. And occasionally I hear the name pop up. Somebody's using it, but that's really awesome.
Yeah, my friend Jason Dominguez called me out on it. I don't know. Somebody took a picture of me. I think my daughter assists me on a lot of these family shoots, which is amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
And my friend was like, "I can't believe you're still using that shoot sack." And I was like, "I love my shoot sack." So it's kind of become a funny thing that I use, and nobody makes anything like it. I don't understand why. I think it's the most useful tool for me, just because it's kind of like a big man purse.
It is, and it's flexible, and it doesn't take up a lot of space if you have to roll it up and pack it somewhere. For anybody who's curious and has never heard of it before, it's the Shoot, SHOOT, and then SAC, shootsack.com. We'll link to it in the show notes. Well, let's get to kind of the meat of our conversation, and we've already alluded to the fact that you've been in the industry for a little while. Maybe you can just briefly walk our listeners through that timeline. And by the way, why this story even matters is because, again, the perspective that I'm really craving to hear from Jason, from his experience in the industry, it comes from all these experiences, from this narrative. So, Jason, I'll let you just kind of take the floor here and share a little bit of where you've come from.
Sure. So, God, I hate this part of any of these interviews because, I'll be 51 in January. I'm not ashamed of that. And, I'm starting to feel my age a little bit in the industry. I've been around a long time, and, I think I'm unique to a lot of people in the industry because I started shooting when I was 17 years old. And when I say shooting, I shot my first wedding when I was 17 years old.
Wow.
So, I've been doing it a long time, and I've had a really, really wonderful career over the years. And I've done a lot of different things, everything from, I started shooting weddings in high school. And during that time, when I graduated, I went to FIT in New York City for fashion photography. And then after that, I worked with fashion photographers. And then I worked in the commercial world. I had full-time jobs shooting catalogs to full-time jobs. I was a full-time photographer at Conair and Cuisinart for a couple of years. And during that time, I always shot weddings. So I had a whole 2 careers going at the same time in the early part of my career. And then the wedding photographer that I had worked for many years got cancer and died pretty quickly. Wow. And the business closed, and his wife, just one afternoon, probably a year after the business had closed up and I hadn't heard from her, and said, "I'm disconnecting the phone. Would you like me to forward the calls to your business? Because you're the only photographer out of the galley of photographers. You're the only full-time guy." And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure."
Whoa.
And literally that's how my business in weddings started. And I started getting phone calls, and I love to tell the story of one of the first phone calls I got was from a woman who was thinking she was calling Stephen Bass, who was the photographer. And in talking to her, I said, "Well, Stephen passed away. Oh my God, that's so sad." And I'm talking to her for a few minutes, and she says, "Oh my God, is your name is Jason, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Oh my God, you shot my bat mitzvah."
Whoa.
And so she was 21 years old or 22 years old. Yeah. And I had shot her, 10 years earlier. So that's kind of how I got started, and kind of took some of his business and was getting lots of calls. And I really blew an opportunity there because I was totally unprepared. But I made a decision about a year after to just shoot weddings full time. And then I opened a studio in Chelsea, which I ran for another 15 years. And I did both commercial work and wedding photography. And then I started, getting involved in teaching in the industry, at WPPI and PPA and a lot of smaller things, and Photo Plus in New York. And I was very friendly with the crew that ran Photo Plus and then had bought WPPI. And just with a lot of conversations, I got very lucky being the right place at the right time. As some people would say, 90% of success is just showing up.
Yeah.
As a New York story, that's kind of how I wound up at PPI, and they offered me a job, and I did that for 5 years. We could talk a little bit about that if you want separately. Sure. And then I took a job working for Firefly Song Freedom out here in St. Louis, and we moved our family out here just about 2 years ago from being a born and bred New Yorker. And that was 2 years of interesting working. And I've moved on from that. And now I'm back to shooting again and working on some other stuff that I'm excited. I can't talk about it right now.
Oh, top secret.
I can talk a little bit about it, but in leaving Song Freedom, one of the biggest things from leaving WPPI, I realized was that as much as I loved the job, I missed being in live events and working in the community so much from almost the moment I left. And it's been an interesting journey for the last couple of years leading up to now. And that's kind of what I've been working on. So that's my history. Photographer and worked for WPPI, had some amazing experiences, a job of a lifetime, and now back to doing other stuff.
And there's so many different directions that we could go. Looking at the timeline, I still remember, was it the Chelsea studio that you used to host some of the parties, like post or pre Photo Plus? Yeah, those parties there. That was a good time for sure.
Oh, I miss that studio so much. And it provided so many wonderful years. I was, again, really lucky. I'd been working for a photographer who had the studio downstairs, and had been looking for a studio, never thought that I could ever afford a studio in New York City. And lo and behold, there was a bulletin board by the elevator that said looking for studio share. It was literally upstairs, and the guy wanted a very reasonable amount of rent, and I just jumped on it.
Yeah.
And 5 years later, he moved out, and I stayed in there for 15 years. And it was just such a great space. And I went from, it was not a great neighborhood when we first moved in to just, Annie Leibovitz was across the street.
Yeah. I remember when you guys told me that, and I was kind of starstruck and walking out. I'm like, oh, she photographs in that building over there.
So you could look into the studio. It was amazing.
Yeah. That's wild. Okay. But then WPPI, and we're going to get to, again, I'm so curious about your perspective gained through, for what amounts to 30 plus years, it's so much experience, and what that would mean as far as perspective is just got to be fascinating. But WPPI, I remember when you got the gig, and I think maybe when I first heard that you had, the first time I saw you, it was kind of a congratulations conversation. But then seeing you in times after that, I just remember this sense of exhaustion being a theme. I can only imagine the amount of stress that was innate to that job. And I wonder if maybe part of that too, I'm curious to get your perspective on this, had to do with just, you've got this overarching perspective on the industry as a whole. I mean, it's the largest trade show in the States, and so many people associated with it, celebrities and non alike. And you see and hear so much. Was that in and of itself a huge weight?
I mean, it was. The most important thing that I wanted to do was just make the show better and build the community and, help photographers. So, that was the blessing with the job. But you're right. Every time I saw you, especially at the show, I was exhausted, and the weeks leading up to it were exhausting because, they hired me as somebody as that. I need somebody to talk to somebody at PPI, and I was that guy. And it was wonderful. Like, it was just so great to be able to talk and help so many people. But at the same time, I was also struggling with a corporation who was also trying to make money doing the job as well. Mm-hmm. So it was the job from an industry perspective, I say, like, working with photographers and vendors in the industry and helping them to be part of the show was the best part of the job. It was absolutely like outward facing, and being that face and helping in that sense was the best part of the job. There was no break for me because I had that part of the job, and then there was the corporate side of it that I had to deal with, which was answering to my bosses and, being part of things that, were just like not fun stuff. And, again, for the photographers out there who have been creative people their whole lives, the transition of going from my own studio where I made my own hours to, working in a corporate office space and working with people that just don't know anything different than being in it was fish out of water for me. So it took me a year easy to just kind of fit into that space. And it was difficult. So I was always being challenged with two forces at the same time. It was all my friends and then my job all the time.
Yeah, and all the time, it seems to be like the key phrase right there. Because I can imagine, especially walking around the trade show floor, it's like, Jason. Like your name is echoing constantly all day long for, what is it, like a week and a half, the WPPI is going on. Yeah, I can only imagine.
And that part was great. But the problem was that I would be tasked to do a million other things that I didn't want to do when I was there. So, it just was really hard. And I never tried to, I tried to enjoy every minute of it, which is why I think I was so exhausted at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, you transitioned from that to Song Freedom, you mentioned, and you had a marketing role there, right?
Yeah. So, I've always, even as a photographer, I like to think of myself as a pretty decent marketer. It was a big part of my role at WPPI because I had a very when they hired me, it was really to produce the conference, but I kind of overarched into a lot of different places, including the marketing department. So I did get to spend a lot of time, learning that craft a little bit. And yeah, with Song Freedom, one of the reasons that I decided to take the job was to go work back in a smaller business. And yeah, I was the CMO of the company.
What would you say, and maybe this ties into my next question about kind of the biggest lessons that you've learned over the last 20, 30 years. What would you say is the biggest lesson from a marketing standpoint specifically that you learned while you're there? Because I'm sure, you brought a lot of experience to bear because of being a photographer, running your own business, being involved in WPPI and being in the process of promoting that. Did you feel like you learned key ideas associated with marketing when you were there at Song Freedom?
Yeah, the advantage that I think I had with WPPI in the corporate office, and then working for a small business that marketed to photographers and filmmakers, was that I understand their voice because I am a photographer, and so I know how to speak to that. So I always felt like if as long as I was authentic about what I was trying to sell, whether it be WPPI or Song Freedom, it's just being authentic about it and trying to come up with a message that is as clear as possible. There needs to be clarity in any kind of marketing message. So for me, it was that, and then trying to find a way to market in general it's hard out there. Yeah,
man. There's a lot of noise.
It's hard. There's a lot of noise. And I think more than ever from a marketing standpoint, there was a wild west of Facebook for a long time, and it's over. And I think we're really going into some challenging times from a marketing standpoint. Nothing has changed as far as if you can organically get something out there that people are talking about, nothing changes. But Facebook is trying to throttle that now.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially as traffic, or at least the popularity of the platform, certain age groups anyway, seems to be diminishing. It'll be interesting to see how, kind of what the next platform is. There's conversation about TikTok, but we all know that that's geared toward a younger crowd, and sure, that's an up and coming potential client. But in the meantime, what is the next platform? You talked about Gary Vaynerchuk earlier, and one of the themes and the things, the variety of things that he says has to do with just simple awareness of what platforms are most popular, making sure that you are, and not just most popular now, but seem to be coming up, and going to those platforms, taking advantage of them while they aren't this behemoth like Facebook has become, and leveraging those platforms as a marketing platform. I don't know what the next thing is aside from TikTok. He says that LinkedIn is another popular platform. Of course, that depends on your business model. But it'll be interesting to see how this all kind of plays out. You mentioned two key ideas though around the marketing effort. One is authenticity, and this is a word that I think in some ways has been overused to the point that it kind of feels cliche. But when I think about authenticity, in fact, I was just having a conversation. I just have a small marketing team at Photographers Edit, my new company, Milu, and the Bokeh Podcast. And we were having a meeting on Tuesday, and I was talking to Mara, who is working on our Milu project right now, about how to bring a certain tone of voice to a video when she's creating video content, or maybe even just audio content. And what I was telling her, and this is what I do for me personally, is I actually put myself in tune with the idea that I'm trying to communicate. I make it very personal for me, so that the emotion and the tone of voice that I'm communicating, that's coming across, that it is coming from a real personal place. The idea is very personal to me. And I think it matters. It comes across in an expression. If you're shooting video, it comes across in the tone of your voice. So when I think about authenticity, that's something that comes to mind. And then clarity, to our earlier conversation, it's a noisy world. If we aren't clear about what it is that we're trying to, number one, who we're communicating to, you alluded to that, Jason, the target market, but then what it is that we are trying to communicate to them, there's going to be a tendency to be wordy. And so it's really, really, really important, especially when people are just seeing endless amounts of content on a daily basis, that we have a very clear message that isn't difficult to follow, that doesn't have to be read into in order to effectively convert a client.
Yeah. So I'll add to that. And I don't know if you were going to get to this, but like some of the things that I learned from along those lines in working with photographers and all these wonderful creative people over the years. And I fall in the same category. As creative people, we are never lost for an idea. ever. To me, like, and working in the corporate world, we would go into an office and they'd be like, we need some ideas for marketing. And I'd be like, just, vomiting ideas at them, like I get a lot of no's, and I'm just like, I'll just keep coming up with ideas. But I think as creative people, like, ideas are wonderful things. And then we have a gift that we can come up with ideas. Man, we stink at execution. And it's the photographers who have the great ideas that execute are the ones who succeed. And that, again, so cliche, but that clarity comes from coming up with the great idea, then gaining clarity how you want to get that idea out there, but then everything falls away. Clarity is about everything falling away once you understand what it is that you want to market or the idea that you have. And quite often we come up with these great ideas that really just create more noise. But when you can find something where you can take that idea and then decide exactly what you want, and everything else falls away. For example, my family photography business, sure, I could shoot weddings, or I could, this time of year, I could shoot in the studio, but I'm not going to do any of that. That's a really broad way to look at it. But, just taking those ideas and that one marketing idea and just sticking with that idea and never deviating.
Well, I mean, you talked about photographing families at landmarks. So now you're getting to be more specific, and then including that idea of simplicity in the experience. Again, you're filtering in a different way. These are, I think, wonderful examples for our listeners of how, when we're talking about, again, the significance of a brand position, going back to the first point in our conversation, is doing exactly what Jason's just talking about, filtering out anything that is irrelevant to one primary idea. Yes, there are a lot of options out there, and it's fun to think about all the options and even try some of them. But at the end of the day, you're going to get lost in the mix if you aren't specific, and you're not clear then in communicating the specificity of your brand and your brand position. It's really important to be able to do that. So I know we could spend probably another couple episodes talking about those topics there, but I mean, we were talking about perspective earlier, and I really appreciate your perspective. And let's get to just some practical lessons that you've learned that you feel like photographers should pay closer attention to. Because again, when I think about you, Jason, as not only a photographer for so long, and I mean, we've had endless conversations over the years. One of the things that I appreciate about you is you have a tendency of kind of just calling things as you see them. And sometimes that can come across as really direct or blunt, but I think we need more of that more often. With that kind of perspective as a photographer, all the experience that you had interacting with photographers, being a photographer, running a studio, running businesses, but then taking it to another level and going to WPPI, and then taking a step back from being an active full-time photographer and being able to look at the industry as a whole. You have to have seen some things that were maybe aha moments for yourself, or you see a tendency or a trend or a theme, a behavioral pattern of photographers that ultimately was hurting them. I'm just really curious to get some of this perspective. So if you don't mind, and again, I want to kind of let you take the floor here, will you share a few ideas, maybe even like 5 of the most important lessons or principles that you've learned from your experience in the industry so far?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the biggest things was walking away from being a photographer. So I have perspective on not shooting for almost 7 years. Yeah. So I can tell you that when I wasn't shooting, like I literally went from like shooting, 15, 20 weddings to 0. And it was really jarring. That's not true. I shot a few weddings while I started my first year at WPPI, but it was really jarring because I didn't have any day to day. Like I handed that off to my studio manager and then another guy who they wound up buying the business from me. But anyway, so as a photographer and working with lots of photographers and watching photographers grow up in the industry in general, photographers get into it because they love photography and they tend to easily make it about themselves. It's just who we are. We're creative people. We want to create the best art, but number one, understanding how important your job is and just be an adult. Like it is every picture that we take for somebody else is going to be an important picture. And I have perspective on that as a WPPI person and as an older person looking back at photos of myself. You saw the picture I posted of myself on Facebook yesterday. It was from 2007. It feels like yesterday to me, but man, I look a lot older. And I look at it and it's friends of mine that I've been friends with for a long time, and they're really important people to me. It's just a snapshot, but every picture that we get paid to do, even if we're not getting paid, we're asked to do, that ask is important. And remember how important that is.
And when you talk about being adult in conjunction with that idea, can you explain a little bit about what you mean?
Don't be a creative brat. Like, again, being direct, like sometimes instead of taking the picture that the client wants, we steer them in the direction of doing something else, or just say, I don't want to do that. Or I wish I could come up with like a better example than that.
But we kind of let our ego drive the way that we're engaging with the client.
Don't let don't let the ego drive. Be an adult is really, don't let your ego get in the way.
Okay.
As a wedding photographer, but even as a family photographer, like looking back at my photos from 10, 15 years ago, the images that I see my clients, my friends that, are on Facebook, they always will post the moments versus the great portrait. So shoot for the moments. And those are the moments are always the most poignant. And if you can get a great moment, it doesn't matter about the quality of the actual image, whether the lighting was great or not, is being present for those moments. And it's always in my images. And I don't want to use the word, be a great PJ person, be a great photojournalist. I'm not saying that. Like shooting and making sure that those moments are shot, that they're so important. And those people get older. And especially older adults, like grandparents or parents, those photos they're so important.
Yeah.
So I always kind of remind photographers about that.
Well, and you talk about the fact that picture doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. And I think about as a professional photographer, as an editing company owner, and I look at the pictures that I have in my refrigerator of me with my kids or with my friends or my girlfriend or whoever, and it's not that the picture is perfectly sharp. It's not that the picture is perfectly lit or that the color is absolutely perfect. It's just that I've got that picture of me with them in that particular moment. And maybe it kind of takes me back to whatever was happening at the time. That's the stuff that matters. And I'm a professional. Like I'm the one that should be uber critical of that stuff. And I just don't care. And I think, so to your point, I think it's important to set our ego aside and remember that ultimately it is capturing the moment, that in-between moment for the client, understanding the impact that can have in the long run for that client or for those clients to be able to look back at those moments. It's so important. So understanding, when it ties into your first point, understand how important your job is. And by the way, be adult about it.
Yes.
I love that. And then number 2, shoot for the moments. What's another idea?
Well, so just one quick example that I just remembered. So like shooting for those moments, I had one client who wanted to do their portraits in Central Park, and which was fine. And at the end, she says, I want to go get a hot dog and I want the groomsmen all eating a hot dog. And I'm like, ugh. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And I'm like, that sounds great. So let's go find a hot dog vendor. Yeah. And I took, and instead of just, taking a cliche shot, the guy's eating a hot dog, which I did, that's what she wanted. I took some really candid moments of them enjoying the hot dogs. And man, they're such great pictures. They're fun. And they're wearing kilts, by the way. They're wearing kilts, awesome, eating a hot dog. And like one of the guys has this giant smile on his face with an entire chunk of hot dog in his mouth and mustard on the side. Yeah. And it's a great photo. Like it makes me laugh. And, so like I did the picture that they wanted, but then I allowed my ego to take a better picture. So like, shooting for those moments, but then, then you can get creative on it. And when you kind of challenge yourself like that, that's when, you really separate yourself. So anyway, moving on from that, a business plan every single year. I can't stress it enough. Just, it doesn't have to be a formal business plan. Just run the numbers. Look, if you have an accountant, your accountant is setting up your QuickBooks, look at it. Yeah. Just look at it. Just spend some time going through all the crap that you spent last year and, devise a plan to not spend so much money on that crap. And how am I going to make a little bit more money, and write it down and execute it. That's where I'm talking about the execution is. Let's have a great idea I'm going to shoot 10 more weddings next year. Okay. How are we going to shoot 10 more weddings next year? And I feel like, again, distractions in our business really take us away from it, whether it be getting involved in the community and teaching can be a distraction to, just random stuff. So like, make sure that you're staying focused on the business that's making you money and focus on that.
I mean, this speaks back to the point that you made earlier, which is the significance of planning. And I know, I'll speak from personal experience, certainly wasn't, I was going to say it wasn't a strength, and it's still something that I have to work on. But I know that many photographers, they may consider themselves the artist type, and they can be creative, like you're saying, endlessly creative. But when it comes to this idea of, even the phrase business plan probably stresses people out, right? And then what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how long is it going to take? And then QuickBooks, oh my word, and numbers, I don't know how to look at the numbers. I love the way in which you just explain that, because what you're suggesting is a process that isn't overly complicated. Look at the numbers in QuickBooks. Look how much money you're spending and where. Look at how much money you're making and where that's coming from, and figure out how you can add to that or build on that. Write down what it is you want to accomplish and the few next actions that will enable you to begin to accomplish that goal for the year. These are simple things. How long would you say it should take somebody to go through that process leading up to the new year?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because it's typically this time of year, as we talked before we jumped on this, that week between Christmas and New Year's that nothing is getting done is usually when I would do stuff like that. That's the week that I'm like, let me clean off my desktop, and there's my QuickBooks thing for my accountant. Let me take a look at that, and then I'll make some notes and decide. And I think, as photographers, this time of year is oh man, it's always been a tough time of year in general, because unless you live in a really warm place where people are coming to get married, like let's say Mexico, but even there, like this upcoming late December, January, February, it can be a really challenging time because we're not making any money.
Yeah.
And so I always tried to take advantage of that time to make sure that I did as much self-help as I possibly could, which is, a new business plan for the year, whatever it may be, so that like I'm ready to go when it comes time to start shooting again in the spring. And, again, it's focusing on that. And I've had a lot of years to kind of tweak this a little bit. And one of the last things that I'll say along those lines is that, learning from your mistakes each year and not dwelling on the things that you do wrong. Move on quickly. Man, I've made some really expensive mistakes over the years. And it is so easy to fall down a rabbit hole. If anybody's listening to this and they just realize they spent a lot of money on the wrong camera system or this or that, like, you got to just figure out how to move on from it and recover quickly, fail quickly and recover. And move on, because it'll eat you alive, and it has for me. And even right now, like I'm rediscovering my entire career right now, and I'm just being totally honest with you. It has been the most challenging year of my entire life.
Really, I've
never had a year where I didn't have so much work to do. I didn't know what to do with it. Like I've had so much free time that I've never been unemployed. I've never been without a career. I've never been at a point where, I would make a phone call and I would just have more work.
Yeah.
Whether I was creating it myself or not. And it has been a tough year. And it's been a lot of self-reflection, and I've been angry, and like I've gone through all the grieving. Even to the point where like I started making phone calls to people I felt like I wasn't nice to over the years, just to get that behind me.
Wow.
And, I'm 50 years old and I'm starting all over again. And I've been very, very candid about it, like, because I can't be the only person out there, that's going through this at my age. It's been hard. And, I have to fall back on the fact that, I've had a wonderful career with a lot of great contacts with people, and I'm going to use that to start whatever it is the next thing that I'm going to do that I can't talk about. But it took me almost a year to get to that point. And again, for me, it's I really just needed to sit down and say, what is it that you want to do? Because, I have a diverse career of experience to draw off of, whether like Liz, my wife came down and I was like applying for a job at like a drug company, like a marketing position. And she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm applying for jobs. she's like, you don't want to do that. And I was like, yeah, I know you really don't. And she's like, why are you doing this? So my wife is my best partner and
That's
is
cool.
Definitely my best advisor. And she's definitely, you think I'm blunt, Nathan? She's definitely my most blunt advocate. But it kind of, yes, it kind of got, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary.
Oh,
so
that's incredible! Congratulations.
That's the best. Thank you. That's the best part of this year. We've gone through some personal stuff too. It's been hard. So, there's a lot of people like, I'm looking forward to maybe doing this podcast with you in 2 years to show you what I've done, but I'm literally starting from a little bit from the bottom. Yeah. And it took me to the point of just saying, okay, this is what you want to do. And, I love this community so much and I love being part of it. And it took me a long time to just say, you know what, you have to decide what the things that you can do, that you can offer and put it together. And that's what I'm working on now. And it's taken a long time, man. It has been a tough year.
Wow. But I mean, you speak to the significance of a business plan, but maybe even more important, or actually not even more important, it's innate to the process of a business plan. And then ultimately what you're describing, you've gone through this year, there's a process of reflection. So you're looking back over a certain time frame. You are acknowledging all things, good and bad. And of course, I mean, just to get a little geeky, the data that comes from something like QuickBooks enables us to do that on a very intelligent level. But then there's a certain amount of, as you were talking about, self-reflection, which is I've experienced these feelings as a result of these experiences, and here's where I can improve in this area, and these are the things that I can kind of put behind me and move forward, ultimately learning from our mistakes, but not fixating on them. I think the distinction between those two things, or those two ideas, is so important, because it is so easy. I mean, we live in such a cushy culture that we have the time to sit around and fixate, and man, it has a tendency of eating us up. I know personally that I've spent, at times, years fixating on certain things to the extent that it's held me back as an individual, as a business owner. And so I'm in this with you, Jason, because I'm trying to also do exactly what you're talking about, which is to be proactive, to move forward. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging those things, those areas where we've fallen short, but ultimately it's about how we move forward and learn from them and take those lessons and apply it and enable us to move forward. I think that's so important. Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah. And again, it's I have the fortunate, ability to have, several, a lot of years behind me. But, that being said, being, 50 years old, there's an age, thing that's happening for me now, with work as well. So starting a business over again at where I'm at, I don't have a lot of years to, I don't have a big runway. But, like the photography business, it's been a lot easier the second time launching it versus just starting over again. So, and again, I try not to dwell on it, but, I spent way too much time being angry about my situation than kind of moving on. But there are things, and I will share this with people, there are things that are completely out of our control. And in my situation, it was. And, unfortunately, sometimes we find ourselves in bad positions. It's what we do with it that's going to make the difference. And that's where I'm at right now.
100%. But you summed that up beautifully too. Well, so speaking of learning from experience, then you spoke to the significance of understanding how important our job is. Secondly, shooting for the moments, making sure that you actively develop a business plan every year. Do you have a couple of other ideas you can share from your experience?
No, I think we covered it.
That sums it up.
that sums it up. Well, again, like as creative people, I don't know when you'll air this, but you need reflection time. You need time to recharge. Again, I'm a community person, so sometimes you just need to be around other people to help you, move forward. I just flew up to my friend Matthew Kemet-Mueller's first Christmas party in Minnesota, just because I needed an evening with some photographer friends who understand me.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one extra thing. Sometimes you just need to be around your friends, and and again, for me, it's about being in the community. So find your community and be part of it, be active, be useful. As a community leader, I could tell you that from the WPPI perspective, there were lots of people who wanted things from me, but I was so much more happy to help them when they were useful to me in some way. And it's not that hard to be useful.
I mean, speak to the idea of community too. I mean, you made the effort to get on a plane. We're not talking about driving 20 minutes across town to go grab coffee. You got on a plane and you went to a party in order to connect with a group of people. Something that I've observed over the last couple of years in particular is a seeming lack of willingness or effort on the part of photographers to actually make the effort to get outside their office or their house and go connect with somebody else in person. Have you observed that as well? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, being in the trade show world in general, it's definitely been a tougher push to get people to show up at events. I have a difficult time understanding why that is. I think a lot of it is just generational. I'm a Gen Xer and I grew up on trade shows, and so they're something that I kind of grew up with. There's so much more connectivity available to us via video chats and FaceTime, and we can get a lot of that stuff without leaving our house.
Yeah.
So it's convenient. You really got to work hard to get on a plane, and you have to plan to book a flight. And, he was kind of joking with me. He's like, I'm having my Christmas party. You should come. And I got off the phone with him and looked on Delta and saw a really cheap flight, and I just booked it. I was like, if I don't go, I'll just, it's $125. I don't care. That's fine. So I don't think it's a money thing, which is weird to me. It's like, it's not a money thing. And you see people will use that excuse a lot. Like, why am I not getting on? Why are they'll say, well, I have to go. It's days away from my work and this and that. And I'm like, but it's not a money. It's cheaper to travel now than it ever has been, in my opinion. So I don't know what that answer is. I think it's the unknown more than anything else. Because, I would find that in any conference, if they came for the first time, they'll come back every year. For the most part, unless they have a bad experience.
Well, but I'm even thinking about, because I remember reading in a Facebook thread a photographer saying that they were wanting to go to this photographer get together. They were wishing that the photographer get together would happen closer to the house, because the get together was 20 minutes from their house. They'd have to drive 20 minutes to go to this get together, 25 minutes. And that seems to be, I know that's not everyone and not everybody is saying those kinds of things, behaving that way, but it seems as though it is. I think you use the word convenient. I think that's probably the best word to describe this. It's a matter of convenience. Photographers, because they can jump on Facebook or do a video chat or get on FaceTime, whatever it is, it's convenient for them to just stay at home. They don't have to make the effort. But I feel like there's a significant component of human interaction that's missed out on when you don't actually go and meet in person, whether that's to a conference or a workshop or just for coffee with somebody. And we all need it so desperately. It just seems as though that needs to be a bit more of a priority.
I mean, maybe it just needs to be something of we just need to be more active about telling people they need to get out of their house.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly maintain that theme here in the podcast. We've talked about it before. I have one last question before I let you go, and I really appreciate you making time for all of us. But you alluded to something just kind of in passing earlier. It caught my attention. And you spoke to the reality, which is that teaching as a photographer isn't necessarily, and maybe I was reading between the lines here, but isn't necessarily something that is going to make your career explode. I've seen, in fact, I was guilty of this very thing 10, I don't know, probably maybe even longer, 10, 12 years ago. There was a desire on my part and my business partner's part to want to speak at industry events. And I think naively at the time anyway, a lot of the motivation there was just kind of notoriety, that we feel some kind of significance by being up on stage and get to speak at this conference or that trade show or this thing. And it felt really good. We weren't really thinking about the fact that putting all this time and effort and energy into doing that was in no way going to actually benefit our photography business. Despite that, it has become quite the trend now for photographers to start workshops, to launch educational courses. And I wonder if you can just speak, again, just from your years of experience as a photographer and then kind of from the top down with WPPI, what are your thoughts on this? Does this actually make sense for most photographers? Is there actual benefit there?
I mean, we're fortunate to be in an industry that loves to share so much. I mean, and I can tell you this, photographers in general are in my opinion, more giving than any other. And that includes filmmakers. And I'm going to get beat up about it. But, I've had, the opportunity on the Song Freedom side. I work with a lot of filmmakers because it's music. And there are some really wonderful people in that space too, but they generally can be a little bit guarded. So we work in a space that willing to give up a lot of information for nothing, which is amazing. It's one of the things that makes our community that's why I love photographers so much. It's just great people, and even filmmakers too, great people. But there's something about our personalities, because I think we love to perform. Yeah. And photography, especially if you're a wedding photographer, you're a little bit of a performer as well, because you interact with more people at a wedding than anyone else at the wedding, including the bride and groom. And you are a performer there. So I think it's in our personalities that we enjoy being around a lot of people, and we love the notoriety, and definitely is a trend of people to want to teach. And I think part of it is because there's a couple things. Number one, they love going to trade shows and small conferences. They love being part of that. Mm-hmm. And this is a way for them to be part of it without having to pay for it, right? If they're giving to this community, then they generally either come for free, or at least part of their trip is planned, right? Yeah. So I think that's one of the reasons that they do it. And then, there's definitely it's a drug. Like it's being on stage and being in front of people, and it definitely feeds your ego quite a bit. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's wonderful. What I've seen too often is the distraction that this industry can provide, in that once you gain a little bit of notoriety, and we're all looking for the next person who can give us something new, there's so many places to go and speak at, whether it be WPPI, PPA, all the PPA chapters, the smaller conferences. Each one is unique in and of itself. They're like high school cliques. You have like the jocks, you have like the burnouts, you have all of those different. You could name any conference, and it would provide that kind of in a very broad stroke way. Right. And you can and by the way, if you're a photographer looking, you should totally vibe with one of those and find it and go to that. But I think that it can be, once you start getting calls. I have a good friend of mine who I talk to on a regular basis, and she's starting to get popular, and I'm constantly reminding her that she runs a super successful business, and that she makes so much more money than she does speaking. And the distraction will at some point affect her bottom line. And every year I remind her, as her sales go up and her speaking engagements, I said, there's a breaking point between the two of them, that at some point you're going to wind up with so many speaking engagements that it's going to affect your business. And the next year you're going to turn around and you're going to be like, oh my God, I lost $20,000 or $30,000 or $100,000 and it never correlates. It never ever, you never make the 100,000 over there speaking, or very few will wind up making. And it's not just the conferences themselves, is that, as an influencer, as you become an influencer, you start getting wonderful attention from other vendors in our industry, whether it be Canon or Nikon or Sony, or, you start getting, maybe you're getting some free stuff. Maybe you're getting some money from those sponsors. And what I always try and remind those people, and I got to work with a lot of different people at WPPI, is that, it's not just a free trinket or camera. They're going to want something in return. And I guarantee you what they want in return is going to cost more than if they had to pay for it. Interesting. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of that, but I always, in anyone that I mentored over the years, in those situations, especially people with super duper successful businesses, is that, God, watch that distraction. It happened in my own business before it was at WPPI. I taught a lot of lighting and stuff like that, and it definitely affected me as well. So I'm one of those people. And everyone's going to hear this. And if you're a younger person, you'll be like, ugh, this old man is just being grumpy and telling me not to do something I want to do. You're not going to listen to me. And that's totally cool. I get it. But maybe just have that in the back of your head that grandpa is telling you, just watch the bottom line, kids.
Yeah.
And I'm not telling you not to speak at a show. I'm just saying when it becomes more than 5 or 10, check yourself on that and really, really make sure it's important.
Well, you use the word distraction. And I think that is really a great word in the context of this conversation, because we talk about something that actually has kind of been a theme in our conversation today, Jason. We talk about here on the podcast. I allude to it, or I call it a big picture view, right? So there's this overarching perspective or view that you have on your life with certain long-term goals that you want to accomplish personally. And then your business model should be dictated by those goals. And then, of course, the business model dictates the clients that we're going after, the type of photography that we do, the prices we're charging, and ultimately how we're spending our time. And so if we've taken the time to establish that so-called big picture view, then we know if something like speaking at a conference, we know whether it's once a year or 10 times a year, is a distraction from reaching our goals. We're able to do exactly what you were talking about earlier, which is to filter out what isn't relevant. And so I would encourage all of our listeners, I mean, even as Jason is saying, there's nothing wrong with speaking at conferences or doing workshops or coming up with courses, but if it distracts from your goal or your set of goals that you've established for yourself, then at least take a step back and reconsider for a second. Because just because the popular people, I put in air quotes, are doing the conferences, they're doing the trade shows, and it looks really cool to see them up there, it doesn't necessarily mean that what they are doing fits your life model and your business model. Understand that. Be clear about what it is that you want, and you'll be able to filter out the distractions. So I love the advice, Jason, and I really appreciate you making time to share all the advice that you have today. We just kind of finished our conversation off by sharing with our listeners where they can find you online, follow you online.
So jasongroupp.com with 2 P's, like a group of people with 2 P's, is where my family photography business is right now. There will be something coming soon that will be on thejasongroupp.com.
Cool.
And I'm excited to share that hopefully in the next couple of months. That's where you can follow me. I'm on Facebook, and Instagram is at Jason Groupp, 2 P's.
Awesome. We will, and maybe we can bring you back on and highlight the secret project, the upcoming project in the next few months as well. But for everybody listening in, we'll put all of these links, the resources, the talking points from today's conversation in the show notes. You can go to bokehpodcast.com or jump to the show notes in your podcast app and reference those. It is a wealth of information, not only from this episode, but previous episodes. Haley does just an incredible job putting that together. So take advantage. And thanks once again, Jason, for making time for all of us.
Yeah, thanks, Haley. We've never met, but thank you.
All right. Talk to you all soon.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.